Dante King. How are you, Dr. King? How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. And, I have to say, I took a few minutes myself to look at some of the videos, to hear some of the, I guess, the research you've done and what have you, and even listening to your dad, who seems to be really proud of you. But, your mom, who you said was your real inspiration in the work that you've delved into. Let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, when people hear or um, know about Dante King, what is it specifically that you sort of message in your work, you communicate?
That's a loaded question. I think, as the last guest said, she alluded to that her work was very unique. My work is very unique. And I think here lately, it has become somewhat controversial for people because I've worked really hard to uplift the voices of people whom I feel their voices were shunned or suppressed. And so particularly I'm looking at race and racism as diseases, as psychological dysfunctions, and understanding the ways in which white people decided to attach themselves to a color, a self-concept, which represented goodness, purity in European culture. And that concept was white. And so I'm investigating that process of human beings attaching themselves to a color and then engineering genocide of other groups, such as people who were native to this country, some of whom were, we refer to as indigenous people, some of whom were even African to a degree. But then also understanding the value system in America being predicated upon color system, where Black people, in terms of what that label or that word meant across various European cultures, and particularly in English culture, how it represented evil and baseness. And so when we understand the class system in America, we have to understand the first class system in America is race, and race determines everything. And so if we understand people who were enslaved, who were predominantly African, were not paid for their work. And then even when they were emancipated and they transitioned into citizenship, it was justifiable to pay them the lowest wages. So they transferred from no wage labor to low wage labor. And so we have to understand how color is very beneficial for America. It is the bedrock of not just the cultural system in America, but the ultimate value system. And the two markers for the color caste system is whiteness and Blackness. And I am saying, based on works that I have studied from people like former late psychiatrist Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Bobby Wright, Dr. Alvin Poussant, that white people are essentially psychopathic in their relations with non-white people.
This is you you have certainly described or defined, I think, what people have simply just called racism, right? You kind of gone a little bit deeper to expose what its origins and how it operates. I mean, in your book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, White Psychopathology, Collective Psychosis, and Trauma in America, I think spells a lot of that out. Why did you endeavor to research and write about this?
Well, once I became aware, particularly when during my study, one of the variables that I noticed, which doesn't get elevated or amplified enough, I started looking at just various colonial level laws. I think I attended, or maybe I read a book, and there was there was an example. There was a series of examples that I was introduced to, which centered various colonial level laws. So the colony of Virginia, the colony of Maryland, the colony of South Carolina. And so there is this correlation or association rather of the term Negro and Blackness to that of a slave. And I think sometimes that is overemphasized, like this legacy that Black people have in terms of slavery. But because if you go back to the colonial period, the laws that they are implementing are not only dealing with the condition of enslavement or slaves as a concept or a group of people or class of people, but they are referring specifically to Negroes. And in these laws that are saying that you can murder people, you can chastise them and beat them and flog them. In many of the laws, they are saying every Negro or all Negro, and that constitutes Black. That is not, and they're making distinctions between Negroes and slaves. And so when I firmly understood that the way in which a white American culture was structured, from a legal standpoint, from a factual standpoint, but it was structured to be anti-Black, then I understood why then, once the enslavement, the antebellum South in terms of slavery as an institution, once that ended, now we're talking about people who are psychologically trained and ingrained with an anti-Black orientation. And it does not matter if these people are enslaved. It does not matter if they are free. It does not matter if they have money or economic, they ascend to a higher degree of socioeconomic status. You are still seen as inadequate. You are still seen as deficient. So I define anti-Blackness in my book, and I talk about how it is a necessary fixture in this country for whites, but also how they are obsessed with color. They are obsessed with their conception of themselves as white, and they are obsessed with Black people and Blackness, because without juxtaposing themselves against a group of people that they determined were Black based on what Blackness represented in their culture, they have no value. And so we're dealing with the people who are inherently insecure, who suffer from what Dr. Poussaint referred to as not psychological corruption, but also a chronic paranoia that non-white people, and particularly Black people, are somehow going to replace them. And that goes to Dr. Cress-Welsing's theory around color confrontation, that they are genetically recessive. And so it is their knowingness of their genetic recessivity that motivates them to behave the way that they do, where non-white people are concerned. And so
well, let me ask you this question though. There's the flip side of that too, right? So because of that, I'm wondering if you also delve into what the impact is on Black people, sort
absolutely,
of with the psychology and what that's done to us. Let's talk a little bit about that.
for sure. To try and simplify it, the one thing that became critically aware, that I became critically aware of, is that Black people, one, as a group, formed on foundations or through foundations of total trauma. So we as a race of people have never been free to be a group or to exist as a community without trauma. And because we weren't Black before we got here. We were Ghanaian, we were from Nigeria, we were Cameroonian, we were from Mali, Togo. And so we weren't Black. And so we have to understand that that label was projected onto us due to white people's interpretation or Europeans' interpretations of what they thought they saw, and also because of what Blackness represented. And we also have to understand that we have never known an existence without white people. And so our identity as Black people is rooted directly in the center of whiteness, because we have adopted, not necessarily have adopted, it was forced into us originally, but our assimilation into this culture, into their institutions, into their structures, through forced assimilation, but then also, as generations progressed, African people not understanding, our greatness, where they come from, not having an attachment to anything else but being an American, which means to be like white people, we have adopted their value systems. So we also aspire to everything that they aspire to. We want to speak like them. We want to go through their institutions. We value their institutions in terms of education and what that means. And we don't understand that this is all a business. America functions on a business. And so the business of Blackness is very popular for America. But let me say this. Black people also are operating in a delusion. And one of the things that have begun saying, Dr. Joy DeGruy, she has a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. I reference it in my work as white people derangement syndrome, because we essentially are Black Europeans in the ways that in the psychologies that we possess, in the language that we speak for the most part, in our cultural customs and cultural values. We've never known an existence without white domination and without the rulership of white people in our lives, not as African Americans and not as Black people in America, not at all.
I was going to ask you about, the previous conversation when we talk about young people who elect to go to an HBCU so that they can have that, that cultural experience. But then I think about Carter G. Woodson's book, who also talks about our education system, as you're saying, it's based upon their system,
A
right?
white
And so we're still
psychology.
being, excuse me?
A white psychology.
Exactly. So having, um, you know, I guess written about this and published books on this, what do you want people to take away? White people, Black people? I mean, and I also want you to address briefly, because when the president talks about DEI, that's another term now that people automatically assume means Black people, right?
Because
We got to get rid of it, right? Although we see when we get rid of these programs, we see who's the folks who are actually losing their jobs and what have you. But so those are two questions. One is, how does DEI fit into this? And also, what do you want people to take away? What is once we know this, some of us already know it, what do we do with this information?
So white people's primary focus has always been Black people. And I do think we have to understand that as we hear white people using that phrase, DEI, you may as well substitute it for the N word, because that is, for the most part, I'm not going to say conclusively, but for the most part, how that term is being leveraged. We saw, for example, in the affirmative action case where the white guy, Edward Bloom, used a group of Asian students to target Black students and to target Latino students, but Black students primarily. And I believe that this wave that we're seeing concerning DEI and white people's preoccupation with it, let me back up and let me say this. White people are fine with diversity. They are fine with diversity in the context of subjugation, in the context of oppression. They are not fine with diversity in the context of have to share access to opportunity and or resources, not at all. And so we have to then understand that what we just have seen within the last 15 to 20 years in this country, white people are very upset. And let me just give a few examples. You
Well,
had
we only have a couple minutes left because we've got another segment, but if you can kind of conclude quickly, we do want to bring you back to give you a little bit more time to talk about this, but just bring us to what you want people to take away. What should Black people do? What should white people do? Do you have any prescriptions on how we address this issue, or is it just ingrained in America?
it's not just that it's ingrained, but Dr. Amos Wilson talks about we are in the midst of institutional cultural warfare and terrorism. We have to understand that, yeah, to understand that people have engaged in psychopathic behavior for centuries for their benefit. We have to understand we don't know where this is going. And so I think people just need to take cover, hope for the best, and do what they need to do to try and take care of themselves on a daily basis and just take it day by day.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, Dante King, I want to thank you. I definitely want to show your book again for folks who want to delve a little bit deeper
Thank you.
beyond our conversation.
Can
Go
people
ahead.
also go to Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness.com? If you go to Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness.com, you'll see a 10-part episodic docuseries where there are 10 episodes of Black people, for the most part, having discussions just like this. We shot 10 episodes, so please go and check it out along with the book.
Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. So are you on the West Coast?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And you might trigger conversations, more of these conversations in communities around the country. I'm sure that's what's happened, and this book will be a good starting place.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.